Welcome back to Federal News Network's Zero Trust Exchange as we continue to gather up wisdom from folks across government and industry on how to successfully implement zero trust. In this session, we're going to focus on some interesting work the Air Force is doing to prove out a concept that could very well end up being that service's future architecture for zero trust. It's being led by the AFNet Sustainment and Operations Branch, along with a lot of partners across the Air Force, including, interestingly, the Platform One team. Part of the plan here, as I understand it, is to use some of the DevSecOps methodologies the Air Force has already proven out there to implement a software-based zero trust framework. To correct anything I just said and to tell us a lot more about what's going on in the Air Force, we've got two guests with us. Raju Renyen, the lead engineer for cybersecurity and control systems, and Captain Christopher Kadama, military engineer for cybersecurity and control systems, both with the AFNet Sustainment and Operations Branch. Thanks, both of you, for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And let me just throw it open with a really basic question. Can you give us a little bit of an introduction into the R&D work that you're doing right now and the basic framework the Air Force is exploring to implement zero trust?
We want to virtualize a lot of the existing components that make up our base network boundaries, because right now they're dedicated hardware appliances. And as part of that, we also want to integrate a zero trust access point so that we can start implementing some of these zero trust ideas into our network. So as part of our R&D and work, our research and development work, which we have a prototype set up in the lab, and our goal is to first start off with a pilot at Hickam, Pearl Harbor Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, and update the boundary on their network. This should increase the throughput that their boundary can provide, and it will also allow us to pilot out some of the zero trust capabilities that we're trying to figure out.
Air Force, especially DoD, it's much needed this type of like agile DevSecOps type of environment. Our competitor everywhere, they are using all the latest and greatest offering from the industry, but for us, we are behind the curve. And this is like great initiative for Air Force and other government agency to start thinking like 4 year ahead that, hey, what's going to happen? So this is like game changer for Air Force. And we have to implement like zero trust. Every packet, every data, every transaction is not trusted, right? So for that, we are planning to put like a virtual boundary with the help of industry partner, and we are planning to use like more of the COTS product, commercial of the shelf product, to build the stack which can give war fighters like cutting edge technology to access their resource or data from anywhere or from any place.
I want to talk a lot more about how DevSecOps is going to play into the design process here. But just to go back to something Captain Kadama said a second ago, you talked about a zero trust access point. Can you expand on what that access point actually does, what it looks like, how it functions in this framework?
Sure. So for the zero trust access point, what we're trying to do is create sort of like a VPN entry point into our network. But instead of a traditional VPN where you have pretty much a large amount of access into the network once you're signed in, we want to be able to do a couple things. One is to only allow the users that are coming in to access the resources that they should be able to access. And the second thing is to integrate with other endpoint security type technologies so that we can get a better sense of like, is the laptop that they're trying to use to log into the network, is that secure? So we want to be able to kind of tie those two together, so that and this is all going back to like the zero trust model, right? Where it doesn't matter where you're connecting in from, as long as we have a good confidence that you're allowed in the network, and then that your computer is fine, then you can access the resources that you're authorized to access. So that's at a high level, that's what we're trying to implement. our pilot.
And getting back to some of the basic foundational ideas around zero trust, I mean, the way people talk about it as a high level is you don't even think about a boundary anymore. You assume breach. It sounds like you've not completely abandoned the idea of boundaries. You both have used that word a couple times here, or am I reading too much into that?
That's a good point. That's definitely, zero trust is definitely not a thing we can achieve overnight. And even for our initial efforts, we're only targeting a certain amount of pilot users. So for the rest of the base, it will still be a boundary and should be considered as a boundary. So as we slowly start moving towards more into the zero trust mindset, we'll start getting away from the concept of a boundary. But especially during this transition period, there will definitely be a need for this concept of a boundary.
Got it. And at that point, once you start making that real transition, things like VPNs and access points will become less and less of a thing, and you'll be authenticating users based on their roles. And as you said before, not really thinking about how they came in. Is that a fair way to think about it?
I think so. They'll still be using some sort of access point to get into to get to the resources they need to. But it won't be, it'll be a lot more distributed than the way it is currently.
Got it. So let's get into a little bit about how DevSecOps is playing a role here in the relationship with the Platform One team. Exciting thing about this interview is we get to go deep on two different buzzwords, zero trust and DevSecOps. What's that relationship actually look like? What sorts of things are you putting through that DevSecOps pipeline, and why did that relationship make sense to you?
So see, everything is a code, right? So DevSecOps has like three components: provisioning component, configuration component, and CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous deployment. So P1, Platform One, over the years, they build the services, they build the repository. So we want to leverage their infrastructure or their offering to embrace Air Force Zero Trust stack. So like we have GitHub there. We have like Party Bus, Iron Bank, all those components are there. So what we are trying to do, like whatever they have, we want to use them and build our own zero trust stack. And also like we are planning to use open framework. So like we are not tying with any vendor solution. Like for Terraform, if like any vendor provides like, hey, use my APIs or use my product, I said no, we'll use open source, so that in future if we want to replace vendor A with vendor B, so we can easily replace those vendors. So that is our focus, like vendor agnostic, software agnostic. It should, all the stack, all the platforms should be built on open standard.
Yep, and to go a little bit more on the Terraform piece, we run our environment on a hyperconverged infrastructure, and so as part of that, one of the partnerships we did with Platform One was they helped us build the Terraform code in order to deploy our virtual appliances onto our infrastructure. And so that was a great help for us as we were getting started. And aside from Terraform, Raju had mentioned GitLab, as that's a component that runs on Platform One, and we're able to use that to host both our code repositories as well as run CI/CD pipelines to deploy our environments. And we're also doing some work with Ansible to configure our virtual machines once after they've been provisioned. And so overall, what this allows us to be able to do is that we can have separate deployment pipelines for testing, as well as for actual deployment, that are nearly identical, and it allows us to be more consistent in our deployment process. It also allows us to, from a security standpoint, to embed security checks. And this is something that Platform One is doing today, right? Where they embed security checks into their pipeline so that they can as their code is being deployed, it will be scanned for vulnerabilities. And so that's something I think we want to get to down the road, is to be able to have that sort of capability that Platform One has with their continuous ATO process.
Right. You also mentioned earlier that there's a good degree of commercial solutions going into the mix here as well. Can you give me a better sense of how you're tying that all together, and sort of what proportions of this entire solution you're building versus buying, and how it all fits together in that open framework, Raj, you talked about?
So nowadays, if you go to any industry partners, they have zero trust solution, any vendor. And this came with the framework, like they have like 7 pillars of zero trust stack. And you have to meet all the requirement of the 7 pillar: access, connection, throughput, all those things, right? They have like huge list of requirement for zero trust stack, right? So like every vendor, right? Like I don't want to name any vendor, but they have their own way of implementing zero trust. But it will end goal is to meet the DISA's or NIST requirement for zero trust, right? So what we are trying to do, like, hey, here is my requirement. This is how we are going to do. If vendor has some solution, like suppose APIs, right? We don't want to like totally depend on their APIs. We should have some leverage to modify their APIs in future. Like suppose they have like 5 attributes. I want to add another 10 attributes. How easily we can take their APIs, modify it and roll out, right? Those type of things. That's why I said that open standard, like we are not tied to any OEM vendor solution. We should have like everything open standard.
Again, without naming specific vendor names here, what's your experience been like so far in the commercial zero trust solutions that you've encountered? How open have those APIs tended to be? How easy are they to work with in this open framework that you're trying to insist that everything fits together into?
So they expose a lot of information, but some of the information, they said that, hey, you have to come to us. We'll release that APIs, right? It's not like complete open standard, but some key source they will keep within themselves. That's what I can tell you.
Okay, and I'm still trying to get a better sense for what proportion of this solution the Air Force is building on its own. So Captain Kadama, you mentioned this thing called Terraform, which sounds like it came through that DevSecOps stack and was something you built versus bought. What else is the Air Force needing to sort of construct on its own in order to make this all work?
Now, in terms of integrating those components together, that's what we're doing as the government, in terms of the network integration, as well as the code that will provision those VMs, et cetera. We are receiving lots of support from the vendors in this aspect, but ultimately we're the ones responsible for this integration. I would say that's the integration and the deployment is what we as the government are trying to do. Raju, did you have anything to add there?
No, on top of that, we have to get IATT, ATO, and we are legally mandated to go through DISA's API list. If something is missing, we have to update DISA to get through an approved product list. That is like a uphill battle for us, getting ATO and going through RMF package. That is huge for us.
For those individual commercial products, I assume you mean, because I assume the fact that you're leveraging Platform One here helps that whole process a lot, since you're already using a pre-approved, pre-accredited security pipeline there, right?
But that is for your dev to pre-prod to prod, right?
Right.
But the software you are running, right? Suppose I'm running software A and it has like something running on my SCI. We are leveraging P1 to pull the configuration, but the OS is provided by vendor A, right? So we have to get ATO for that software. And also like in this zero trust effort, we are also building parallel environment called ICAM, Identity and Credential Access Management. And that is like our attribute store, who has access to what, right? And through that, we are trying to protect our data and other, like for the admins, how the admin will get access to their resource, all those things. And privilege access management is part of ICAM. So all those things needs to be ATO'd, verified, right? We have to go through RMF process, how we are following the security check.
Let me stick with ICAM since Raju brought it up. Like everybody else, I gather you're going to need to start collecting and storing a lot more attributes about individuals and probably systems too than the Air Force currently does today. How far along are you on that pathway? Have you settled on a particular solution to handle identity? How mature is whatever solution you're using there?
See, I can tell you, like, we already have all the attributes. It's in the, we already have all the attributes, right? Today, Air Force is very secure, but it's like on different places. It's not consolidated at one places, right? So we have all the attributes, everything is there. But what we are doing, like, we are trying to pull all the information and we are trying to build the golden repository. What I think Army or Navy is doing with GFOD. We are in the process and we are doing POC with that too.
Captain Kadama told us earlier that this is not going to happen overnight. So I assume you've got to make some choices about what to prioritize and what to do first at these pilot sites. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're racking and stacking all those zero trust priorities and what's going to go first at these base pilot sites?
So I would say, like, we have some of the base in the pipeline. The number one is like PACAF base. And they had like aging hardware we are trying to replace with zero trust stack. So our plan is to build the system here, do the testing, do the performance testing, and our minimum requirement, like each interface should support like minimum 10 gig. That is our like bottom line requirement, that 10 gig. It can go up to 40, 25 or 100, right? So our goal is to like increase the performance, increase the security, and try to protect like some application. We are also implementing like micro segmentation to protect east-west traffic and like lateral movement of the vulnerable system. Those type of things we are trying with PACAF base.
And I wanted to also bring up, because we were just talking about ICAM. Right now, ICAM is just about to get a proof of concept, but we don't quite have a proof of concept yet. So for the zero trust pilot we're doing at HICM, we are planning to use Active Directory as a source of identity attributes for our zero trust solution. So that's so just in sort of thinking about as these new technologies come along. We're trying to be flexible on how we integrate with things as they become, as they have MVPs and as they come online.
Got it. So Active Directory would be kind of just an interim solution for that HICM pilot until you've got more of a long-term ICAM solution in place?
That's correct.
Interesting. So as far as prioritizing bases, I want to see if I understood what Raju said earlier correctly. Is the idea here to start with bases that are in need of infrastructure modernization already, maybe not some of the sites that have been recently updated through the ITAS process or other things?
As you said, that the base which need most attention and the base has like a lot of dependency, we have to take care of that base first. That is like a strategic base for us, PACAF. And we have like a TDC deployment there. So we want to make sure that, hey, the new technology can integrate with any multi-model communication. Like if like suppose like for TDC, if they want to bring their own circuit, we want to adopt or integrate with that type of circuit. So that's why we selected HICM. And once we do like HICM, and we can say that, hey, we have like 80% zero trust solution working there. And again, zero trust is a journey. It's nothing can happen overnight. So every place we go, we'll have lesson learned and what we did wrong, what we did right. Again, come back to Hanscom and refine that requirement, go back, fix it. Once we have the blueprint and prototype, then we can leverage DevSecOps to push all the configuration. We have to think like out of the box. Hey, we don't want to be in the situation like, hey, I'm sending hardware from Germany. I'm sending this thing from there. Then somebody is going there, racking, stacking. It takes months. Here is the box. We'll ship it, connect to my P1 repository, pull the configuration, you are on. Like how we are doing with like our wireless access points or wireless routers. You plug and play. That is our end goal. I don't know how long it will take, but that is our Air Force vision.
Yeah, and it's totally fair to not have a solid handle on how long it'll take, because it is going to be a journey for everybody. I totally understand that. But what's the current pilot timeline look like right now? Or how many years are we talking about before you feel like you're going to have some usable lessons out of this process?
So I would tell you, like at Cape, a Space Force base, they did pilot and they are very successful. And slowly they are moving to production environment. They did in their dev environment and things looks great there. So slowly they're moving to production environment. We build the image here, we ship it to them, and they're moving forward with that. And the next is HICM, right? So hopefully next couple of months, we should be good to go there.
Interesting. I wonder how much it complicates your lives as network administrators or security guys to break off bases one at a time and do the pilots on a base by base basis rather than piloting zero trust concepts on, I don't know, different logical segments of the network, because it's almost like you're running multiple different security architectures on the AFNet at the same time. You got a zero trust physical location over here, and then legacy solutions on the rest of the network. Am I thinking about that right?
No, you're right. So here, the security policy, the global policy is dictated by DoD and DISA. You have to use that. No question asked, right? These are the things, suppose like I have to block adversaries from third world. That is driven by DISA or DoD, right? We take that directive and we put it here in our stack, right? So 60% work is done there. And also like DISA has its own gateway, right? To protect the vulnerabilities or incoming data, right? For us, this is POC. And we did like one base at Cape. That was, I will say that was successful. After HICM, right? Then we'll have more understanding how things will work in AFNet where we missed, because see, right now we have like so many boundaries. We have to get data from each boundary, massage it, compile it, come with the one standard security rule set. All those things we are doing. So once that is done, then our life would be simpler, and we'll put everything in the configuration in DevSecOps. So first we have to create the blueprint for that security structure.
Do you think it'll be a single blueprint once the solution that you come up with is deployed across the Air Forces? Are you going to be able to use the kind of the same playbook at every base and every segment of the network?
Yes, absolutely right. We'll create one sample template, and that will get rolled out to every basis. 90% work is done there, right? Only 10% we have to modify it based on the base requirement. But 90% the core security feature, how things will work, all those things will be defined. 10% you can modify it as the requirement comes.
I think we're gonna, like Raju mentioned, we're gonna learn a lot from the HICM pilot, because that's gonna be our first full base deployment of our stack. So we're expecting that there's gonna be a lot of details that we come to understand there that we can leverage when we actually do a full Air Force network deployment of this.
As Raju mentioned, critical here that everybody follows the same DoD standards, and yet each of the services is approaching this problem set in a slightly different way, it seems like. Can you let us in a little bit on the whatever conversations might be happening to make sure that at the end of this, not just 16th Air Force, but U.S. Cyber Command has visibility down into the stack and can see everything that they need to? Because that's, I think, been an everlasting challenge, even on the legacy networks at least.
Correct. No, we are working with HNC, CDA team. They want to consume data going through a zero trust stack. So we are trying to build some solution which which will forward all the logs, all the data to 33rd, eventually 16th, to do all the analysis and whatever they are doing today. That is their secret mission. But we are in touch with them and we'll provide them all the data, whatever they need.
Is there anything fundamentally about zero trust that makes the problem I just talked about easier compared to legacy networks, gives more visibility to network defenders down into the sorts of things that they would need and want to see?
Correct. So in this case, see, everything is like virtual, right? You're running on one like Dell server or any server, right? So all the software we are running on the SCI, right? We will have like lot of visibility of the soft data coming in, lot of flexibility how to push that data to 33rd or 16th, whatever data they need. It should be like easily configurable. That's what I would say. Like if they want like very like fine grained data, yes, we'll turn on the key and you will start gathering all those data. If not, then we'll just give you whatever you need.
There was in some of the write-ups about the work that you're doing, there was a fair amount of talk about automation and orchestration. Can you talk about where you're going to end up with the ability to more easily automate things on the network from a security perspective once some of this is in place?
So in terms of automation, sort of like what you mentioned about sending logs right to the 33rd, we want to definitely have that completely automated so that we have and integrated, right? So that the organizations that need to have the information that they need, and they don't have to worry about someone manually passing that data over. In terms of deployment of the environment, that's where the pipeline, the DevSecOps will be our automation there, so that we don't have to necessarily need to have someone consoling into a machine and configuring the machine for its specific state items and things like that. I think what that does for us is that it helps us much better manage just in terms of managing the configuration. That's going to help us with our just with making less errors overall when deploying. And it's also going to help with managing the ATO and changes in general.
No, you're right. Suppose there is a zero-day vulnerabilities, right? And we know that, hey, that is going like, I will give you example of solar wind attack, right? If we have that type of problem, so what we will do, like in this case, hey, I know that my VM is running there and it has some attack. So I will drop that VM. I will spin up new VM using automation and orchestration within no time. And all the configuration is pushed within 5 minutes. So that will save time. That will reduce the attack surface area. Those things can be done easily within minutes.
Yeah, and I imagine that's one of the benefits of, as you said earlier, Raju, having a blueprint that covers 90% of what you need to do. Because doing everything that you just talked about, I imagine, has got to be impossible if you've got a different network architecture at every base.
Correct. So first base will take some time, lot of lesson learned and those type of things will happen. But after that, if we are matured enough, next base should be easy. And we are in touch with DISA. What we are doing, we have like weekly calls with their team, like Thunderstorm team. And they are aware of that, what we are trying to do. And we share our effort with them.
One thing we haven't talked about at all so far, and I don't know how much time the two of you spend thinking about this specifically, is user experience on the network. Once zero trust is in place, does anything meaningful change for how easy it is for people to access resources, just to be an average user on the network?
Definitely, things will change. Definitely, because we'll have high throughput transport. That is one thing. How the application is accessed remotely, that is second thing, right? So you have to go through VPN. VPN is like a middleman type of thing. It does its own stuff, then pass the attributes or Kerberos token to backend application, right? Those things would change. And also like we are building like high throughput transport across the base. And also like we are planning to use SD-WAN in next couple of months. So right now we have like L3 VPN, Get VPN, the legacy things we are running across the network, right? So when SD-WAN comes up, and then things will move faster, like for the WAN connectivity.
Are you building in any plans to test bring your own device type approaches into these zero trust pilots?
In future, yes. So right now we are testing with GFE, government provided equipment, and in future, if time permits, then we definitely will try IoT, Internet of Things. And today we have some solution using some application. You can bring your own device. We have like very limited users using like IoT type of devices.
As we start to wind down here, part of the whole point of this event is we're trying to share lessons learned across the government from people who have started experimenting with zero trust. And I'll just ask both of you the broad question for people who are maybe not as far along as you are, even though you're also sort of on the front end of the journey. Any big lessons learned so far that you would share with people who are also going to need to implement a zero trust approach across a large, complex organization? What have you learned early on so far?
I think one thing that we've learned is the importance of testing ourselves as the government. It's one thing for the vendors to advertise that their systems have a certain capability, but it's another thing for us to be able to validate those capabilities in the lab to make sure that they meet the needs for our bases. That's definitely something that we have been doing and have been continuing to do, and we've definitely had to sort of change our approach for certain things based on our test results. So I think it's really important for the government side of things to have a good test organization for whatever architecture you're trying to deploy. Another lesson learned is I think related to DevSecOps. I think that the earlier and the sooner that you can incorporate that into your design, into your proof of concept, the better it will be in the long run, because it will just save you time and effort, especially kind of tying back into testing. It's definitely saves us some time and effort being able to quickly test different configurations just with the click of a button.
As you said that never ever trust like whatever vendor is saying. You have to test in your lab. And we found some bugs and issues that can be like major problem in future. So that was the biggest one. We found that, hey, if vendor says something, you have to go and test in your lab and verify it and see how that performs. And second thing is like going through like ATO, RMF, that can be like time consuming. We have to like speed up that process.
Yeah, that's a whole different problem. In terms of what you discovered during that testing process, I'm curious. Were they the bugs that you found? Were they mostly having to do with the underlying commercial security product, or were they in the integration process or on the API side?
Not API side. That was in their OS side.
Yep, and I would say that we definitely found issues with our integration, which is easy for us to fix because we're responsible for that. But there were also OS level issues that we either would be a showstopper for us, or we had to kind of tweak our design in order to account for these issues. So I would say yes to both.
And last thing here, I know this entire enterprise goes well beyond your shop. Can you talk about some of the partnerships that have been required here, even just to this point, to start developing this zero trust framework for the Air Force, and who you're going to be partnering with as you move into this pilot stage?
So we partnered with ACC, CCC, AFRL, 16th, PACAF, and obviously DISA.
Yeah, I think that covers it. I know within the 16th Air Force, we've been working with both the 561st NOS and the 26th NOS for their support as well on the operations side. But I think Raju pretty much covered it.
Very good. I think that's a great place to leave it. I want to thank our guests, Raju Renyan, the lead engineer for cybersecurity and control systems, and Captain Christopher Kadama, a military engineer for cybersecurity and control systems, both at the AFNet Sustainment and Operations Branch. And I'm Jared Serbu. Thanks again for joining us for the Federal News Network Zero Trust Exchange, and we'll send it back to the studio.